Hello, hello. I wanted to cover the errata, which I think is Bucky errata, which I think is still fresh news, and I want to talk about sort of predictions for Toronto, which will have that weird time where it's like the set, but the errata is active. Don't have a clue why they're doing it like that. Because and yeah, I'll talk about the Toronto predictions and then sort of what an errata going forward and the way they're using it will affect the game, in my opinion, because they're doing it. This is quite a drastic way to use it. In physical card games, an errata is really used if a card is just written so wrong that it could cause a game-breaking thing. You know, if you had a certain combo of cards, you could just cheese and win every game because you got to play it in a certain way. In digital card games, it seems to happen all the time. I know I remember in Hearthstone, it was just like people complaining about this card. Well, we'd just go errata it then. But yeah, it's quite a bit more impactful in card games. Of course, now it means players will have to keep note of the errata. I think if you play like at home and you don't, that's fine because you can just be like, I'll just do what the card says and that's fine. But yeah, in competitive play, it now means that whenever we get to an event, we have to also focus on errata. There's only Bucky right now, and then a few others I think like are just written wrong. I think maybe the Ursula is supposed to be a Dreamborn, but she's a Storyborn. There's nothing hugely major there, but this is a full card, entirely errated. I assume they'll reprint it as well. But yeah, um, I mean the card is just upsetting to play against. It's a negative for both people on both sides. I think you have to be quite a strange person to enjoy playing Bucky. You're upsetting your opponent the entire game, and you know they're not having fun. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't like upsetting players, you're not having fun either. Um, I believe in here as well. They stated as early as turn two, you can make people discard multiple cards, which is just insanely not fun. Yeah, you could get Bucky set up, shift the Diablo, then make the Diablo sing sudden chill, and then you'll be up on drawing cards as well, and they have to answer the Diablo. So yeah, I'm also grateful they went after. Oh, I'm grateful. I'm glad they went after the Bucky, not the Diablo. I think the Diablo's annoying but fair in its own right. It just requires an instant reaction, which now with Red having Brawl and Steel always having loads of answers, I think is fine. But yeah, going into Toronto, I will mention that Bucky has just gate kept so many decks from the meta. When the meta started at set four, my first deck I was interested in was Mufasa. I think it got a lot of tools. I think it now got more than one heal draw mechanic with the Madriel. It got loads more characters to play with. Gaston's always been great as well. The 2/4 that lets you play and reduce costs. So it felt like that deck was really coming into its own. But the issue was when you played into Green Steel, your only answers for Bucky was B Prep or the big Sisu. Cards that didn't really need to be in that deck, but they also had to be in the deck to beat this deck. So it just got to the point where you just wouldn't play it because you'd have this really harsh lose to against Bucky. But I think now that that's gone, it will have a rise. I think as well, just to mention, now that this version of Green Steel with Bucky is gone, we're probably going to see the rise of the older Merfolk Flynn build, which most people, as annoying as discarding is, I felt it was a fair fight. I enjoyed that deck. I liked the aggro aspect of it. I felt Merfolk was good because it wasn't just you got two lore, then they hit a 1/1 like with Lilo or Maleficent. It was you got two lore, then you got to make them discard a card. So like it was just insanely good on the play. So yeah, I mentioned Mufasa. I think that's the deck that I'm expecting to see rise again. I think a lot of people might have been still playing Mufasa. If you're at a local scene where just no one really cared that much about Green Steel, you might have just been playing reps and reps of Mufasa, and then you're going to be really set for it. A few other decks as well, green purple, the aggro one. Again, they just didn't have a clean answer for Bucky, and at that point, there wasn't even a card to tech in. You know, they didn't have red removal, so they couldn't be like, oh, at least I can be prep the Bucky. They can't even do that. They had no bounce. They had to wait for it to exit. I think the only game plan you had was just draw a bunch of cards and hopefully race them. I don't even know. I've watched Bennett play it. He's an amazing player and did really well um, at Spockham, but I'd imagine your game plan is you just don't want those matchups because you just sort of lose quite harshly. And another deck that sort of springs to mind is Blurple, the blue purple nickname, because again it just didn't have an answer for Bucky. it couldn't throw one damage or two damage across the board like steel can. It couldn't wipe the board like red can with V prep. So it just had no answer for us. So I had to sit there either drawing, race it, hope they didn't hit the Bucky on two. But yeah, those decks were all just sort of gate kept by this really bad matchup. So I think out of the three I've just mentioned, though, I think green purple will see quite a lot of play. I think and Mufasa will see a lot of play. Blurple's always been in this sort of we don't know if it's meta good, sort of meta bad. It's a good deck. I've seen it win store champs, but yeah, I'm not playing Blurple, and I don't know many others who bring that deck anywhere either as well. But yeah, there's loads of things being gate kept, and like I say, I really prefer the usual version of Green Steel, or the other version where you played Flynn, you played Merfolk, and then you could set up a Prince John, or you could set up an Ursula, then play a Prince John, sing Sudden Chill, and you go heavy on the discard, heavy on the law, and you just race them. So yeah, I think it opens up the game to a lot more decks. I think we won't just have the top four anymore. I think we're going to have a much wider stance, and that'll be really nice. And if you're like me, I haven't thought set four has been amazing. No disrespect to it, I've still had a lot of fun with it. But set three was really really good. Set four has felt a bit of a step back from that, which means set five for most of us, I think, is just going to feel amazing because it will be sort of a return it's that thing of anything is better than this. So yeah, I think we're gonna have a really good time in set five. Hopefully they don't put any more gate cardy sort of cards out there like this. But yeah, if my predictions for Toronto, I'd say Fassa is most likely going to get a bigger percentage. I don't think people realise because it got shut down so early, how good it actually was getting versus RP and RB and all the other decks. It felt 50-50 when I was testing it really early on the set. I believe Zan rated it as like his third most popular deck or the third best deck in the meta, and then it just sort of fell down because Bucky was such an instant answer. So yeah, I mentioned those decks, but any decks that just couldn't answer Bucky prior to this now can go forward and sort of have a really good position in the meta. So yeah, I think I'll put Mufasa at the top. That's my prediction. You're going to see Mufasa, which isn't great for blue steel players because that deck's actually quite a hard matchup for us. Green purple again, like there's been a lot of players just practicing away with it, playing events and dodging green steel and getting really good results with it. I mean, we've seen two, I think, at really high levels, regionals, and then maybe Blurple, but then there's just going to be a lot of other things that just realize now that they don't have to deal this 1-1 with Ward that could only really die from a board wipe or board wide damage is gone, so they can do more things with it. Um, yeah, that's my Toronto prediction. But going forward, sort of talking about the errata. So if you're just here for Toronto, you can click off now. Um, it's kind of strange how they've done this. At this point, I mean I'm repeating old news here. I would have just assumed you'd go for a ban. Putting this card in this position is so strange. To basically any one of the things they could have done. I'm repeating again what everyone said. Any one of the things they could have done would have made this card, probably keeping the meta but not really playable. If they'd have took the ward off, people would be like, yeah, all right, we'll try and play the deck still. If they made it three costs, you'd be like, yeah, okay, now I have to play a bit more off curve, but I'll keep trying with it. You could still Diablo shift and do it at a later turn, which would actually work against their saying of you could discard on turn two. So, and you couldn't really double Bucky as easily. It would be a bit painful to do three and four Bucky, and you still haven't laid a Floodborn. And the shift thing, the new ability of it has to be done on shift. My assumption is we're getting some cards in set five that will work well with this. There's maybe some four cost, five cost shifts that will. So you want to spend your turn one and turn two playing them, turn three set up Bucky, turn four, turn five shifts. Because otherwise I don't understand even why they've done that. That's just so stupid. Maybe just the stupid. Yeah, well, it's just a very strange way to do it. Um, yeah, I think if they could have made the cost higher and took his ward away, maybe gave it evasive or something, or just anything. They've really put it into the ground here to the point where it just I don't see it. It's not a place in this meta. That's why I'm saying set five. We might see some cards that do put it into the meta. But yeah, going forward with the erratas, that means cards aren't particularly safe. If the community is not happy with a card, and it was very clear the community wasn't happy with Bucky. I mean, I wasn't happy with Bucky. It was just Ink turn two, play Bucky was always like, oh, okay, here we go. We've got to do this again. I've got to find Grab Your Swords or Tinkerbell. So yeah, it was. it seems that the community is loud enough and the card is objectively unfair or unfun to play against, they will make errata changes, which is strange for me. The example I always go back to because I think it's always a good one, was the Mew VMAX deck in Pokemon. It was very powerful. It was getting like 70% of meta shares and stuff like that. Just a really good, really refined deck. It locked you out of the game. It disrupted your hand. It played certain cards that it locked the board in, and you just had to sit there watching them draw cards and just beat you basically. But they didn't ban any cards. They didn't errata any cards. They added in hard counter tech cards. So they added a card called Drapion V, which did double damage to this Mew card, and it also meant that like it was also free to activate. It had a really easy thing. I think it needed so many of the Mew V Maxes to be on board, and you could hit it for double damage and take it out. But it doesn't look like they're doing that with this one. Yeah, it would have, in my opinion, they could have just added some really hard counter cards to Bucky. But I guess the only issue here is in Pokemon you could put that Drapion V card into any deck. There's no restrictions. There's no color restrictions. But in this game there is. If you made a tech card, you'd have to make a tech card for every color, maybe bar green. But yeah, maybe that's where it's falling because right now Bucky's annoying, but like Steel can deal with it. Whereas these off colors that don't have Steel, so like Blurple and Green Purple, I'm going to use those two. Fasa could, in a sense, put be prepared in their deck if they wanted to. They just can't answer it, and they just don't, and then they just fall out of the meta, and then they're not playable, and then you've lost like a bunch of people who wanted to play that deck. So yeah, maybe tech carding isn't their best route right now. I think a ban list would have just been better than this though. But yeah, going forward, if we have another card that's upsetting us as much, I'm gonna mention Dime and Hiram because if they're just cards that always seem to get complained about. As a blue player, I don't complain about them. But I do complain about Hiram. But yeah, Dime creates an environment where it's uninteractable lore for some matchups. You know, they haven't put in item removal, and you've just sat there dime tapping off the top and getting your lore, and they can't do anything, and there's a clock on it, and it's just uninteractive, and it can't be fun some games. I will admit that. So yeah, cards like that. Bucky will be the prime example because it's the first one errated. But if a card is producing an unfun, uninteractive environment for a matchup, it's most likely they'll look at those for errataing. I don't think cards like Medusa will get errated, but that's also one that's been on my mind because if we look at what that card does, it gatekeeps so much of the community, so much of the game. When you make a deck, the first thing you think of is, oh, well, not the first thing, but it's one of the things you think of is this card just going to be Medusa and I lose value. I probably won't play it. From a blue spill perspective, of course, we've got Tragic Beast that's coming back into lists now, but for a while it was just, oh, it just dies to Medusa, so I don't want to play it. And that's just kind of odd for a game of only four sets right now, going into five. Card pool is fairly small, so you're already stopping a bunch of cards for not being played. I think Hades was dropped like the second that Medusa was really introduced, and now you sort of see it come back a little bit, but not at the extent it was at because it's just like, yeah, the value of me playing Hades, taking that out, then you Medusaing it is so low. So yeah, I think cards that are unfair and unfun or just create an environment where it's just not interactive. I mean, Bucky did all those things. It was uninteractive. It was unfun. It just sat there and it just like stack affected when you played any Floodborne. So that wasn't great. And I think Dime has the sort of same, conditions. There's a lot of decks that just can't remove the Dime, so you could just sit there Dime tapping. But then cards like Medusa, maybe not as much. They do gatekeep, but in a sense they are fair for what they do. But yeah, I think going forward, they've set quite a precedent with this errata here, that if a card just isn't fun or just not creating a good environment of gameplay, they will just errata it in the future. But yeah, that's sort of my views.